In the past couple of days we've been factoring quadratic expressions. Today we're going to be focusing on factoring some cubic expressions, and today we're looking at two types. One is a sum of cubes where we have a cubed plus b cubed, and the second is a difference of cubes in which we have a cubed minus b cubed. Now if you look at their outcomes, you see that we have a binomial and a trinomial for their answers for each of these, and they look almost identical, but there is a small difference. In a sum, we have plus and then minus for our first two signs, and in the difference, the signs are switched. So that'll be the tricky part, is to remember which one goes with which, and we have a mnemonic to help us remember that, and that mnemonic is SOAP. So let's look at our sum of cubes. S stands for same sign. So if we look at the sum, we start with a plus sign, which means that our first sign in our answer is going to be the same. So if you start with plus, the first sign is a plus sign. O stands for opposite sign, and the opposite of plus is minus. And AP is always positive, and that means that the third sign, no matter if you start with the sum or a difference, it is always going to be positive. And it works the same for a difference. We start with a subtraction sign, so if we follow SOAP, same sign will also be a subtraction sign. After that, O means the opposite, which will be a plus, and AP, always positive, we write a plus sign. Another thing that can help us today is having a list of common cubes, and a lot of us have 1 through 5 memorized already. But the 6 through 10 is not very common to most of our knowledge, so we're going to write this down and we'll have it and use it for a reference today, and then I'll make solving these problems a lot easier. Let's look at example 1. First step for example 1, we've got to figure out what our A and our B terms actually are. So if we look at example 1, I see that I have a 125, and in my list of common cubes 125 is also there, and 125 is the cube of 5. So that means my A will involve a 5. And since we have an A cubed, that's really easy to figure out what the A exponent is. A's exponent is just 1. So my A term for the sum of cubes is going to be 5A, and 5A cubed is the same thing as 125A cubed. So there's our first term. Second term, I see 27. I also see 27 up here. The cubed root of 27 is 3, so that means our B term is going to be 3. Alright, now if we look back at our sum of cubes shortcut here, we have a binomial, trinomial together. We've got to make sure that we write these down in the correct order. So I have my A is 5A, B is 3, and if it helps, you can write it off to the side. A is 5A, B equals 3, and we're going to plug that into this part right here. So start with our binomial. We've got A plus B. SOAP says same sign, so we'll use the plus. 5A plus 3. The trinomial is a little bit trickier. We've got to do A squared. So if I take 5A, I have to remember to square that one. And the O in SOAP says we're using the opposite sign this time, and that's a minus. The next thing we have up here is A times B. So I'll take my A and multiply it times my B. And then AP stands for always positive, and the last term we have here is B squared. So we're going to take 3 and square it. Now it's time to simplify where possible. So if we look at this first binomial, there's not really much we can do here, so we'll just drop everything down. But in the trinomial, I have 5A squared, and when I can do that, 5 squared is 25, A squared is A squared. In the middle, negative 5A times 3 is negative 15A. And lastly, we've got 3 squared, and we know that that is 9. Now the additional step would be to check to make sure that nothing else will factor out, because sometimes this trinomial will be able to factor out further. In today's examples we're going to keep that simple, but always double check and make sure that you can't go any further for factoring your trinomial here. Let's take a look at example 2. Keep your reference sheets handy. Okay, with example 2, we have 3x cubed minus 192, and if you'll notice on your list of cubes, 3 and 192 don't show up, so that should be an indicator that something's funny. And if you'll remember, the very first thing you're supposed to do with all factoring is check for a GCF. And if you'll look here, we have 3, 192, both of those are divisible by 3, so let's go ahead and divide those by 3. So if we factor out the GCF here, we're going to have x cubed minus 64. And that makes a lot more sense here. 64 is on our list of cubes now, and we can proceed just like we did with example 1. This time we have a difference of cubes instead of a sum. So our signs are going to be a little bit different, but everything inside should be pretty much the same. So let's identify our A and our B, and we'll write it off to the side. We have A. Now the only thing here is x cubed, so A is just going to be x. 64's cubed root is 4. So our A term is x, our B term is 4. We're ready to plug those in. Alright, if you'll look back up to your difference of cubes shortcut, we've got A and B in the first binomial, and SOAP tells us that the first sign is going to be the same. So we're going to have x minus 4. Okay. The trinomial, the next thing we have is a squared. So we're going to take x and square it. The next sign, O, would be opposite. So the opposite of minus is plus. And then we've got A times B, x times 4. Our last sign is always positive, so we'll write plus, and then we've got b squared, which is 4. Alright, let's simplify. Bring down your GCF. Your binomial, can't do anything else with it. But our trinomial, x squared will be x squared. X times 4 is 4x, and 4 squared is 16. Again, you need to double check to make sure that you can't factor anything else any further than you can already, and in this example nothing else will factor. So we are finished. If you have any questions, make sure that you ask in class and we'll go over any kind of questions that you've got.